Alright, are we ready to sew up and add our belt loops? We have one long piece here that I have pre-pressed basically into thirds. You press up the bottom, then you press down the top, overlapping each, that center section. You can leave this raw if you plan on doing the two stitch lines. The two stitch lines should keep it from fraying, or you can finish it off. Mine was fraying quite a bit, so I decided to finish it off. I often leave it, just depends on the fabric. It will add a little bit of bulk if you choose to finish it off. So either way, if you decide your fabric would be better off finished on the edge, or if you decided it'll be better off not finished, whatever you prefer. I did this method where you just press it over and then top stitch it because it's much less bulky than sewing a tube and having the 4 layers versus the 3. And a lot of my stretch denims or stretch corduroy, stretch twill was already pretty thick and bulky, and I didn't want to add any bulk. I also did not enjoy turning teeny tiny tubes of fabric. So hopefully you like this method too. All I'm doing now is top stitching my 2 rows down each side all the way down. I prefer mine about 1/8 of an inch away from each side. I like the way that looks. I'm happy with it. You can top stitch it however you like, whatever you like the look of. You can do 2 rows just like me. You could edge stitch both sides. You could do 3 rows if you wanted. It's really whatever you prefer the look of. You can do a decorative stitch down all of these. It wouldn't take too long. This is why I do it in one long strand as well instead of sewing each belt loop separately. I think it's much easier to press and stitch one long belt loop and then cut them versus pressing and stitching each individual piece. I also find it helps keep your top stitching really uniform from belt loop to belt loop if you do it all in one piece like this. You can, however, cut your individual 3-inch long belt loops and press them all separately and top stitch them all separately if you find that you hate doing it all in one strip like this. I'm using top stitching thread here. You can use normal all-purpose, whatever you prefer the look of. Okay, so we're nice and top stitched. I do recommend pressing this one more time just in case it has warped in any way, stretched out from your top stitching. Just give it a really quick little press. And now we're going to trim our 1 long strip into our 5 short belt loops. For the adult, which is what I'm doing, they're 3 inches a piece, so you have a 15-inch long strip. We're just going to trim it down to 5 3-inch pieces. I prefer to cut one piece and then use that piece as my standard against all the other ones. I'm going to cut from the 6 to the 3 just because the youth is a little bit smaller and I can't remember exactly the measurement off the top of my head. But you're just going to cut them in 5 equal pieces. They're a little longer or taller than the waistband, and when we stitch them on, you'll see why it has a little bit extra. Here we go, and now we have 5 perfectly even pieces. We're ready to attach them to our jeans. All right, now we get to talk about where exactly we're going to put these 5 belt loops. The ones on the front are going to come just inside our front pocket curve. I like to place mine about 1/4 of an inch away from my top stitching. on each side, and you're placing your belt loop right sides down. There are a couple methods to attaching your belt loops. This is my favorite. If you have another favorite method, you can of course always do it that way. On the back, what we're going to do is we're going to place one on the center back. Now, since we press our seam allowance to the left and top stitch to the left, I put my belt loop to the left of the center. I do not center it on the seam. I center it along with that top stitching. You can do either one, whichever one looks correct to you. For me, my eye wants to follow that top stitching, have the top stitching of the belt loop match the top stitching of the seam. Now we're just finding the center mark between our front belt loop and our center back belt loop. And it's going to be towards the back. So on your back piece, near the side seam, but on the back piece. As you can see, I like to mark both of mine, and then I just center my belt loop on my marking. You can of course always add more belt loops if you want more belt loops, if you wear a lot of belts and know that you prefer more, or if you just want more for decorative purposes. Just baste these along the top, and then we're going to attach our waistband right sides together all along the top of the jeans. Stitch it on. And now what we're going to do is give it a really nice good press. We're going to press the seam allowance up away from the jeans and the waistband up away from the jeans. For the next couple steps, we're actually just going to ignore the belt loops to finish the waistband. So once we are top stitching the waistband along the bottom to close it, we are still just going to ignore the belt loops. So we're going to pin it, leaving the belt loops hanging down there. And I'll show you the next time we're going to touch these belt loops. Here we are stitching the waistband along the bottom, and again just ignoring those belt loops hanging out below the waistband right now. Okay, so we're finishing top stitching along the bottom of our waistband. We're going to turn here at the front, stitch up that center front of our waistband. We're going to start top stitching along the top edge of our waistband. And here's where the last step of our belt loops come in. Well, almost our last step. We're going to pivot here at the bottom, twist it around, stitch up this front center, then pivot again at the top. We're going to start top stitching along this top edge. And now when we come up to a belt loop, what we're going to do is we are going to press back our raw edge and then align our folded top with the top of our waistband. Okay, I'm going to press it back about 3/8 of an inch and top stitch along the top of the waistband and the belt loop at the same time. If you are really rough on your belt loops, you can go back and forth on your belt loops to reinforce them. If you don't really ever use them, you can just go over it one time. Again, folding back that raw edge a little bit, about 3/8 of an inch, and then top stitching it onto the waistband as you top stitch the top of the waistband. I often will use a pin to hold it in place, folding it back. Now you can pre-press your belt loops folded back a little bit. I did not here. I usually don't, but you can, especially if you're having a hard time pressing back the 3/8 of an inch to a half an inch, I'm sorry. You can pre-press that. I find it really tiny and small, and I burn my fingers when I try to do it. So I just do it a finger press. You do want to make sure you're nice and uniform with how much you're bending back so that your belt loops finish all the same length. See, I stick a pin in there usually to hold it in place. And I just use the same pin over and over as I stitch through. Of course, you can pre-do this. I never do because I like my top stitching to be continuous from the bottom, turn up the front, go along the top. I never like to back stitch and stop my top stitching. So I do it just like I showed you here in one long stitch. All right, we have one more step on these belt loops. Once we're done top stitching the rest of the waistband, and this one is optional, but it's how most ready-to-wear jeans are. So I'm going to show you how you can top stitch your bottom of your belt loops if you don't want them sticking out at all, if you want them to lay a little flatter to your body. Okay, so here we are. What we're going to do is take them to the iron, and we're going to press them down here so we get a nice press down at the bottom. And then once we get them nice and pressed, we can top stitch this little bottom part. So you want to get it really close to that bottom fold, and it is going to be just below your waistband. And I just top stitch, if I'm using top stitching thread, I just do a straight stitch and I go down and back one time. If you're using all-purpose thread, you might want to do a small bar tack, which is a very short and narrow zigzag down it. And we're done. Fabulous belt loops. I can't wait to see yours when you're modeling your Janet jeans. Bye, y'all.